Can you hear me now? I'm just going to move my head a little bit to see if there's any interference from my hair. Like, we've had a bias against people that have mental disorders for as long as humanity has existed.
Right.
Crime is something that has existed for as long as humanity has existed. मुझे भेज देना.
How?
Internally. Don't
Top me.
publicize, don't publish.
You should tell him his videos are only like this. Start.
Okay. This mic costs 38,000.
See, you're rich now, increment level.
Damn. That series with Sherlock where there's a line which says, I'm not a something, I'm a high-functioning sociopath.
Yeah.
And people wear it on their t-shirts and it's a theme and people make it their entire personality. And I'm like, do you understand what being a sociopath means? You should not be throwing this term around so casually. This is not being recorded, no?
Yes, it's being recorded. Hello and welcome to the JIBS podcast. I'm your host Bhaskar. Today we have a really interesting topic to talk about, something that a lot of people get incorrect and there's a lot of misconceptions around it. We're talking about mental health disorders and criminal behavior. We're joined by Nivedita Salar. She's a research fellow at the Jindal Institute of Behavioral Sciences. Nivedita, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Bhaskar.
I think the topic is really fascinating and I think it's a topic that we really need to discuss because there's so much stigma and nonsensical information about how mental health disorders lead to criminal behavior, right? That's the idea that a lot of people keep talking about. And we as people who work in the field know this is not the case, but I think it's important we sort of inform other people that why this is not the case, right? So could you please tell us how mental health disorders and criminal behavior are unrelated?
Right. So, with regards to mental disorders or mental illnesses, specifically certain conditions which are often in the limelight and their relationship with crime, the jury is not out in that we don't have a definite answer about whether or not these conditions lead to crime, right? If you look at the empirical evidence that we have a variety of studies telling us a variety of many different things. Like certain studies, certain empirical evidence tells us that a certain set of disorders, and even within a certain set of disorders, if you look at something like schizophrenia, right, we have some evidence which tells us that the positive symptoms of schizophrenia led to violent criminal tendencies and violent sort of offensive behaviors, whereas negative symptoms of schizophrenia don't lead to violent tendencies or criminal behaviors. That is one side of it. Then there's another side of the argument, again, based in science and based in evidence, which tells us that, which sort of takes it to the nature-nurture debate, which tells us that it's the neighborhood that an individual is born in and raised in and goes back to after whatever mental health episode that actually determines whether or not they will go ahead and offend and commit a crime, or maybe even re-offend and add to the problem of recidivism. And then there's other studies which tell us that there is no link at all, or
Non-significant.
Yeah, it's a non-significant result. So, like I said, the jury is not out.
What's interesting is that, first of all, I think it's important we tell people that positive symptoms of and negative symptoms of schizophrenia is not like positive or negative, right? The symptoms, positive meaning that an accentuation of symptoms, and negative meaning a reduction.
Yes.
Not reduction, but a different set of symptoms.
Think of it in the mathematical sense. Positive adds something and negative removes something.
Reduces from normality, right? What quote unquote normality. Now, I think when you say the jury is not out, to me it sounds like actually there is whatever studies are saying that say positive symptoms are linked with criminal behavior. Doesn't it sound like a gross generalization? Because for something to have causality, right, to say that this causes that, almost everybody who has those symptoms should display criminal behavior, right? If you take a smaller sample and all the people in that sample have it, you'll naturally find it and another group might not. So I find that a little bit difficult to understand.
No, you're absolutely right in that criticism that even within these papers, when they talk about the limitations and further scope of studies, that is one of the first things that they highlight, that their samples are limited to psychiatric inpatients from a variety of hospitals. So they already start with a sampling bias to begin with. And logistically, it also makes sense that you can't sort of sample an entire population of an entire city. You start with some place and then that's just sort of how research works. But Is there a sampling bias? 100%. Does that impact these results? Also 100%. Is there some level of confirmation bias involved? Also 100%, which is what leads to the fact that we don't, like, we're not able to say with 100% or even 90% and above certainty that yes, there is a relationship. We have enough of a starting point to start asking these questions and start investigating, and also just based on the biases and prejudices that a lot of people have, based a lot on sort of the misrepresentation that we see in media and the way sort of news media portrays certain things, and how very often, let's say specifically in the US, whenever something about mass shootings comes up, the conversation tends to go from gun control to, oh, this person was mentally ill and they had this, that, whatever disorder, which is why they did whatever they did, which is not entirely
true.
true.
This is very interesting when you say the bias gets in. I think what we could be, the question that is required to be asked is that why is this idea that mental health disorders lead to criminal behavior so prevalent, right? As opposed to, say, diabetes leading to criminal behavior, like that is not prevalent at all. And of course, that it makes no sense on either direction. But why is this idea so prevalent that mental health disorder? Is it like the news media? Is it a bias in our thinking?
Like, we've had a bias against people that have mental disorders for as long as humanity has existed.
Right.
Crime is something that has existed for as long as humanity has existed. And it's easy to make that generalization that if you see somebody having some sort of convulsive disorder, they're having a panic attack, they don't really seem to be in control of themselves. You don't necessarily have an explanation for that. It's easy for people who are unaware and who are lacking that knowledge to make that connection. Oh, this person is also likely to hurt other people in that process. And I also want to clarify over here that very often when we talk about the link between mental conditions and crime, we often refer to violent crime and often crime that sort of hurts other people, right? Like I say this in my classes all the time, that crime is inherently a social interaction because there's an offender and there's an affected party. The affected party can obviously be property or person. Honestly, we don't really care that much about property if somebody is vandalizing it, but if there is a person who is being impacted, whose life is being harmed, their health is being endangered, that's when we sort of take more notice.
So it sounds to me like almost that people, in a very biased way, choose some criminal behavior over the entire umbrella of criminal behavior, and then they choose this like beyond anti-normative, not anti-normative, but something that is a behavior that is not normative, like mental health illnesses and the symptoms associated. And then because these two are closer in proximity in our minds, we sort of say that, okay, criminal behavior, or if you have mental health illnesses, then you are more likely to engage in criminal behavior. And then the media tops up on it where they'll highlight this, right? The representative bias will come in.
Right. Basically, I'm forgetting exactly what that cognitive bias is called, but that thing where you read about something and then you just start noticing it a lot more.
Right. Availability heuristic and representative
Availability heuristic, that. And like you said, something happens with one individual, and even if there's no actual basis in reality for that specific thing, right? With mental illness or mental disorders, they don't operate in a vacuum, right? Again, going back to the nature versus nurture debate. We know from sort of very seminal studies that have been conducted in this area that, again, mental disorders don't operate in a vacuum, and there's a bunch of risk factors associated with it. Risk factors like, did they grow up in a poor neighborhood? What specific disorder are we talking about? What specific symptom are we talking about? Is there some sort of intergenerational criminality involved in this person's family? And is there some sort of substance abuse involved? Because we know that it's not just specifically mental disorders in conjunction with something else. If they lead to criminal behavior, it's usually always in conjunction with two major things. One of them being substance abuse of some kind, and the other being just sort of general psychopathic tendencies. So those are the two risk factors. But when the media talks about, oh, this person who had whatever disorder, they're not talking about all the other risk factors that are in play, or all the other protective factors that this person is not protected by.
So they'll talk about, say, a mass shooting, but they will not talk about like daily theft, right? Or theft of a small nature, or even crossing the traffic signal in a car is a problematic behavior, right? Red light, and then you go through.
I mean, it's illegal, not even problematic.
Right? I don't want to say criminal, but yeah, it's illegal, right? But that they will not associate with like a mental health illness. And when it's a magnified problem, then they are trying to look for an answer, and because
It's
they
the
think they
easier
are normal,
answer in
it's the
many
easiest
cases.
answer to get to,
Yeah.
right? Which is such an unfortunate thing because mental illnesses are only of so many types, right? I think one other reason I feel like there is this understanding that mental health illnesses lead to criminal behavior is all these shows about serial killers, right? They will talk about serial killers,
I have such a bone to pick with all of
right?
them.
And they'll pick up these really like extreme cases because of people with psychopathic tendencies or what we today call antisocial personality disorder. And even within that framework, they will take people in that extreme end and show the criminal behavior they've taken, and then expect that the people will have enough sense to be able to,
The media literacy to be able to
distinguish
understand.
it, right?
Yeah.
But people will just buy into what you're selling, and I think that's where it comes from. What do you think?
Right. So, I mean, off the top of my head, I can already think of so many examples of these that make the problem worse and also glorify mental disorders to such an extent. Like, I know that series with Sherlock where there's a line which says, I'm not a something something, I'm a high functioning sociopath.
Yeah.
And people wear it on their t-shirts and it's a theme and people make it their entire personality. And I'm like, do you understand what being a sociopath means? You should not be throwing this term around so casually. And again, there's so many
Where
movies.
we've removed it now from the
Yes,
list
it's
of
no
disorders,
longer a
right? It's
part.
not a term that is
It
used
never
anymore.
was a part of the
Right.
DSM actually.
Right.
Sociopathy and psychopathy, these are sort of subsections of antisocial personality disorder. They were never a part of the DSM.
Right.
But again, people don't have either the media literacy or the understanding of actual psychological disorders to be able to make that differentiation and understand that they are buying into something without necessarily fully understanding it. It's like having Mandarin on your t-shirt,
Yeah, and you don't
not knowing what it's saying, right? So
I think the other thing is that because of this, what also happens as an effect, and I just tell me if this is something that happens. Actually, this is something I think happens is that people who have other forms of mental health disorders, right? Say depression, anxiety, panic disorder, or dissociative disorders, whichever kind, right? Things that are not so much associated with criminal behavior, right? It creates stigma against them to actually say that, I'm suffering from a mental health illness and this is the one, because they are already anticipating that other people will think that now I will engage in criminal behavior,
yes,
right?
100%. Again, this takes me back to, there's this movie called Split, SPLIT. I think it has a very popular actor, Michael Fassbender or something his name is, and it centers around a man who has dissociative identity disorder, which earlier used to be called multiple personality disorder. And again, when people think of dissociative identity, they think of a person with like 26 personalities living in their head and just talking to themselves, having conversations between different personalities. And that movie Split as well, I know because so many people have spoken to me about it, that I know about dissociative identity because of that movie. And in that movie, that person basically was a criminal, committed a bunch of murders. I think there was also some level of cannibalism involved, whatever. It's a pretty disturbing movie. But for a lot of people, how dissociative identity became a part of the zeitgeist was in a negative light.
Yes. And that it has to be so enormous, right? And
Yeah.
that you're talking to each other.
Yes, and we also see this even within the criminal justice system. This happened sometime in the past decade in the United States. There was a video of a man who was autistic, and he was basically shot by the police while he was fully lying on the ground, fully immobilized. He was not a threat to anyone, but because the police was aware that this person is mentally not okay, they were like, we're at exaggerated danger of being hurt by this person, so preemptively they shot him.
Oh wow, that's nice.
And again, I don't remember exact details, but I just remember watching that video and it was just completely unnecessary, like even without getting into police brutality as a topic within the US. But this is what the misinformation does, right? It causes real harm at the hands of people who should be a little more educated about these things. And even within the criminal justice system, we see that people with mental disorders, they don't get the help that they need, right? They need treatment, they need rehabilitation, they need reformation. They don't need punishment, incarceration to just be taken away from society, because that's not going to help. 20 years later, they will be released, they'll still be schizophrenic, they'll go ahead and murder the same number of people, if not more. So they get punished for longer, they don't get the help that they need, and it ultimately just sort of creates more victims.
I feel like there's also the argument where people are now like, if you say that you have a mental health illness, you'll get a smaller,
Oh yes, there is that misconception
right, that you'll get a
as
lesser,
well.
what is that called?
Sentence,
So,
probation.
yeah, a lesser sentence,
Right.
an
It will
easier
be
life in prison,
not
and all
as
of
harsh
that, right?
punishment.
And that is also because of some movie or some TV show. I think I'm sure
That is
brought it up.
again also a misconception.
Yeah.
There's this book called I'm actually forgetting, but something related to psychopathy, acing the psychopath test or something like that, which talks about this person who was.
Oh, I've read this one.
Have you?
Joe something.
Yes,
right?
John something his name is,
yeah,
and he also has a TED talk.
Yeah,
If we could link it, I think that would be great. It's very informative. I really like that TED talk.
Test.
Yes, that one. And something similar, that because it's actually called, I think, malingering is what the phenomenon is, where you fake having a disorder or certain symptoms so that you can get not necessarily financial benefit out of it, but just some kind of social benefit out of it. One of those being that you get a reduced prison sentence and you're sent to a rehabilitation center instead of being in prison. But people have also sort of come to expect everyone to malinger so much that like people with real illnesses are now no longer believed, right? So it's just a lot of stigma coming from a lot of places and a lot of different sources, which all gets magnified and creates an even larger mess than we already are in at this
Is
point.
this similar in India? Like if you have a mental health
India
diagnosis,
has
then
such a long way to go in terms of generally mental health, and also recognizing that mental health has a not mental unhealth, disorders, illnesses, not being in tip-top mental health condition has some sort of role to play when it comes to
behavior in general.
And also criminal behavior, right? So for instance, in some countries recently, postpartum depression, right, which very unfortunately can lead to very sort of unbelievable kind of crimes, like a mother murdering 4 of her children because she was just not able to take care of them. But she was not able to take care of them because she didn't have the support of her husband or somebody from society, right? Very often these women do ask for help, but they're not given the help that they need. And okay, fine, this thing has happened, the woman is now locked up in jail. But what about every single person who heard her cries for help and did not help her? They also have a responsibility, but no one's ready to talk about that. And that conversation still has to happen in India,
And
in
also,
the
I think
Indian
in India,
context.
people generally are like, "Oh, what is the big deal? You know, like you can take care of your children, and if you can't take it, you can't be, you know."
Right, there's a large cultural shift that needs to happen, and we're
Essentially,
quite
where
far
we,
away from it at this point.
essentially where we are at is that it's not a deniable thing that, you know, mental health illnesses don't like are
It's a
unrelated
question
to
worth
criminal
investigating
behavior,
for sure.
right? And it's not like the mental health illnesses are unrelated to criminal behavior. Some of them, when some people are suffering through a particular disorder or illness, they may engage in criminal behavior
They're at increased risk, I would
at
say.
increased risk, right? But it's not causal. It's not that every person who has that particular disorder
right.
will engage in criminal
Right,
behavior.
it always exists at an intersection of many different
Right.
risk factors. An important risk factor can be mental disorders.
Right.
But again, if
But
that
also
mental
support systems and all of those things.
if it is taken care of, your person is as good as normal,
right,
pretty much.
So it's essentially that yes, that there is possibilities, but that doesn't mean you color everybody with the same paint.
Yeah, and
who
don't
has that
shove it
disorder.
under the carpet. Recognize that there's a problem and work to solving it instead of just being like, oh, taboo, we don't talk about this. We'll just put them in prison. It's not helping anybody.
I think this is really good, really informative, I think. Thank you, Nivedita, for being here.
Thank you, Bhaskar, for having me and the JIBS media team.
And this is the JIBS podcast. If you like this, we are going to continue producing some more for you, and you can like, share, subscribe, and comment.
We will read all of them.
Yeah, I will. So thank you, and we look forward to showcasing more of these podcasts.